Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Conversations. Today's discussion is with Charles Araujo. Charles is an industry analyst, professional speaker, author of 3 books and hundreds of articles. He published the Digital Experience Report and founded and writes for the Institute of Digital Transformation. Before becoming an analyst, Charlie was, in his own words, a dyed in the wool IT guy. He ran technical ops for a $1 billion healthcare org and has been a consultant running large scale technology and digital transformation programs. First of all, thanks for doing this, Charlie.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have this conversation. These are always the fun ones.
Yeah, and I've been looking forward to this ever since we got first introduced by Alan. In that email, he said something very specific that you had told him, right? So essentially, that you specifically steer away from talking about or writing about conversational AI. Now, what is conversational AI to you? Let's unpack that, and why are you against it?
Definitely not against it. I'll get down the record, but I will. I just a quick little segue. I always find it fun. I've written 3 books, and my very first book came out, and I started speaking all over the world about it. And I was giving a speech in St. Louis, and this person quoted me from my book, and then asked this question about it. And it's like, it is not fair to quote me because I may not remember what the heck I wrote. So you're talking about this email. It's like, what did I say? No. So here's the deal.
Sure.
What you're referring to is I have an enterprise technology landscape map that I sort of have put together conceptually, and I identify these different areas. And the point that I was making is that conversational AI is not listed in that as a sort of separate category. And the reason is because, and I think what we're seeing with Gen AI and all that is sort of proving this out, is that the conversational interface is going to become the norm. And it's going to become the norm across an entire breadth of products and technologies and interactions. And as such, it's going to a certain extent, cease to become a category unto itself. And I think this is true with a lot of technologies, that particularly those that are very useful, that they just become embedded and intrinsic in a whole range of technologies. And then there's a secondary reason, or a related reason about it, and that is that for me, my focus is always, what problem am I trying to solve? Conversational AI in and of itself doesn't solve a problem. Conversational AI is a means to solving a problem, but you still have to define the problem. And so I think when we look at this, we're going to be looking at the problems we solve and then asking ourselves, does conversational AI play a role, or can it play a role in helping us solve that problem? And then one last thing I will add, I'm going to be a politician, and I'm going to answer the question that I wanted you to ask me. That I think it's really, really important to distinguish the types of conversational AI. So there is conversational AI, I will call it not historical, pre-open AI conversational AI. And then there's the sort of Gen AI version, or the open AI ChatGPT version of it that was introduced. And the reason this is important is that right now, because this frenzy over the last year, people have taken conversational AI to be synonymous with the ChatGPT version, which is rooted in large language models, which by their very definition, and again, I'm bullish on that whole category, I use it every day, but by their very definition, don't have the level of sort of trust and semantic layers that we need, or that we would apply. And the pre that, when we talked about conversational AI, we were talking about something sort of different, and meaning it was still this conversational interface, but they were rooted in what would be much more traditional enterprise type technologies behind it, and therefore were approached differently. So I think they're merging in that we are now looking at all of this as this idea of a conversational interface, but I'm just very wary about either looking at it as a category, or B, looking at it as all the same.
Got it. And you've written about the difference between conversational AI and Gen AI, right? You just touched upon how pre-OpenAI conversational AI was different than Gen AI. What are the other types of AI that have been used or you've seen used in ITSM and IT in general? And what do you think would be the applications of AI in general? Like, and you can touch upon the use cases of machine learning or Gen AI and in ITSM.
Specific. So, well, I think you're touching on one of my other, you know, things that I get frustrated with. So you're trying to narrow me to ITSM, so I'll try to keep my rant to a minimum. But one of my big frustrations with the whole rise of ChatGPT and Gen AI is that, again, it is not only become synonymous with conversational AI or like sort of subsume that, it's sort of taken over the entire idea that all AI is Gen AI. And the reality is that AI itself is an incredibly broad category. I'm not an AI expert by any realm here, but there are massive amounts, or all these different sort of layers. We clearly, prior to all of this, we were talking mostly about machine learning, but this idea that we can use AI in a predictive means to look at its set of data, identify those patterns, and isolate stuff. So there's vision learning, there's deep learning, there's all these different forms of AI that far surpass or that go well beyond just the conversational AI elements of it. And so from an ITSM perspective, we need to think about, well, what are the challenges that enterprise IT organizations, and therefore from an ITSM perspective, we are dealing with? And it really comes down to a handful of use cases. I mean, there's probably more if we really dig into it, but clearly one of it is we are awash in operational data. So when we look at all of this inbound data, trying to identify how do you sort out what of this is real and what do we need to pay attention to, I think that's an obvious use case, and clearly the whole AI ops movement is focused on that sort of thing. But there's also, I think, many emerging use cases where we think about, I'm an old ITSM guy, and one of the departments used to report to me was a service desk, and I actually built an entire system, no AI in it, but an entire system that was exclusively focused on trying to ensure that my teams were working on the most critical, most important issues at any given time. That the default for most ticketing systems, still to this day, shocking to me, is still sort of first in, first out. If the first one that comes in, that's the one we deal with. And while I get that from a broad experience, as an IT organization, your top priority is trying to reduce the level of impact at a business level to the organization. So, the entire thing around ITIL and ITSM is categorizing these incidents based on impact and severity and all of that. And frankly, that's almost entirely done by human judgment. And we as humans are really crappy at making those judgments. So that's a perfect case of use of where we could apply AI. In this case, it would be predictive AI, where we can use a combination of data points, right? We can use data coming in from our operational systems that tell us, objectively what is being impacted, right? We don't have to guess what is the impact of this, how widespread is it? And then we can use a combination of some subjective data and historical data on how long things did take to resolve, how important this business unit is, a bunch of these different things to then maybe automatically prioritize and use AI to dynamically prioritize these. I think another great use case of using these approaches are to automatically assign. And again, we're doing some of this. I mean, some of the ITSM systems are doing some of this automatic assignment today. Most of it are based on fairly simplistic rules. If you now take some of these underlying AI technologies and apply it, I think you can become much more sophisticated, much more dynamic. And ultimately, where I think we land is at the end of the day, service management is and will remain a workflow. At the end of the day, it's really a workflow process that I think there is a tremendous opportunity to manage that workflow using AI, again, much more effectively. I wrote an article for CIO several years ago about this idea that a computer could be your boss, that for many of our activities, a computer can do a better job at identifying the various priorities, competing priorities, and direct work based on that. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And let your imagination run wild. I mean, I think there's basically anytime I can apply data and use that data to make decisions, a system, a technology is going to probably do that better than a human if I'm truly dealing with that sort of objective set of data.
Got it. And especially if you're dealing with a ton of data coming from different systems, a human would always have limitations, and a machine would be able to just like take into account everything that's relevant, right? Speaking of which, I was just watching an interview from a cybersecurity expert about a system just collecting data from multiple points and giving it a score in terms of how anomalous that is. So, for instance, let's say person A, let's call him John, right? Logs in at an odd time, let's say 10:30 p.m., and that's unusual for them. So it's a low score. It's still an anomaly, but a low score. But they access an application that they generally don't need for their work, or they generally don't access. Now the score sort of compounds, right? And now they transferred a ton of data outside the organization. That's a definite cybersecurity issue, right? Like, so what have you seen? It would be great if you could share some examples of Gen AI or AI in general being applied in the realm of cybersecurity.
Well, I think that when we think about security, there's at the end of the day, it's always about the same thing. It's about data. So you just gave an example of a fairly linear data progression,
Right.
and that would imply a human actor. I think the greatest risk when we think about cybersecurity is that the bad guys are also using this technology and creating bots and being able to place them in ways that they know that they can circumvent some of those things or try to avoid that. So what you just described is something that a human actor was sitting there can probably identify that. And so it's a great first step of using something like AI. And frankly, I probably don't need true AI to do that. I can use an algorithmic approach to identifying and scoring an anomalous activity. To me, the greatest uses for AI are going to be to identify those things or to perform those actions that a human's going to be very hard pressed to do. And where that often comes into play is when I'm looking at anomalous data occurring often asynchronously across multiple systems, with variable sort of elements to their behavior. And so the challenge there is being able, and by the way, it's the same challenge we have when we're trying to apply this in an AI ops perspective, right? It's identifying what are all those threads that are occurring in different places, and then being able to link them all up and say, oh, this is all the same thing. It's all related to the same thing. Well, security is the exact same issue. And that is very, very hard for a human to do. I mean, people are always worried about AI taking jobs. And I'm very, if you have a job that can be reduced to this simple log, a simple script, yeah, I guess you should be worried. But for the most part, what we want to be using technology to do is frankly things that humans cannot do well. And this is a great example of applying it. So I think that's one way, identifying that behavior that maybe a bot is driving that is very, very difficult for a human actor to identify on their own. And then, so here's the next big step, then to enable remedial action, right? Prior to or without having to raise this up and creating an alert, which by the time that process takes place, the damage may be done, to immediately go, this is anomalous. I'm in a sandbox, build a wall around you and put you in a cage long enough for us to figure out if you're doing something bad or not. And take that type of action immediately, maybe without doing anything that is going to cause long-term impact to the organization, but at least provide a protective layer. And then the other element of this is, I think there's still going to be the human in the loop. There's going to be that human actor that the security person has to assess. Is this, like, let's say I put that cage around them. It's like, okay, is this for real or not? Well, speed is often of the essence. And so I think we can also, and this is the conversational side, I can now use a conversational interface that would allow that security operator to orally give commands to the system to say, bring up this data, instead of having to go and try to figure out where it is, because they can think faster, they can type, they can think faster, they can maneuver through systems, to allow the AI to provide an interface as an assistant there, the whole co-pilot thing, I hate that term, but this whole idea where I can now just talk, this is Star Trek days, yes, computer, show me this. I think that has tremendous ability to then speed that response to then do it. So I think we need to be thinking about how we apply AI across any use case in a much more nuanced fashion, that it's not this one simple thing. And in almost no cases are we just going to turn it on and suddenly magically does everything for us. It's going to be this system that runs alongside of us and helps us do things more efficiently, more effectively, faster, safer, whatever. And that's really where its power is going to lie. And so I mean, that's an example. And again, I'm not a security expert, but certainly I think we're already seeing some of those type of use cases be applied.
Got it. And I've heard you say that last year was there was a lot of hype about AI, and I've read on in various literature, ITSM platforms, that 2024 would be the year when IT leaders will need to actually demonstrate value, right? So the time for dabbling in AI and running low stakes experiment is perhaps over, and now uh, you as an IT leader would need to just implement AI and gradually scale it, perhaps. But let's say you're running an IT team of 10 to 15 folks, right? Mid market, typical mid market IT organization. What would be your strategy for bringing in and implementing AI? And feel free to assume nuances about the business, but basically, what are the factors you would take into account, and how would you go about it?
So first of all, let me start here. Nobody should be implementing AI or any technology for that matter for the sake of technology. If your board or your executive team is coming to you and saying, we need AI, your first question would be why? What's the business challenge that you think AI is going to solve for? If you try to go and implement AI just because you feel that this is the year that it must happen, you're just setting yourself up to waste a lot of time and waste a lot of money. That said, I do think that those organizations that fail to look deep into themselves and ask themselves, where can we start applying AI to create value, either directly in terms of something that's customer facing or from an operational efficiency standpoint, probably will leave yourself at a disadvantage if you do nothing, if you stay static, because clearly there's a ton of hype, clearly there's a lot of pressure, and so your competitors will be looking at how they can apply it. So to me, it's not about do I or don't I do AI. It's what business problems can I solve and where can I extract value from this. So from a framing standpoint, that's where I start. Secondarily, I'm looking at particularly if I'm in a mid-market or what I call the small to medium-sized enterprise, you are probably not going to be developing any AI-driven technology yourself, or there would have to be one heck of a business use case to justify that. AI is an incredibly expensive thing to go, a road to go down across every spectrum: the hardware, the support staff, the development staff, data scientists. It's an entire thing. And it's the easy stuff will get you no advantage, and the hard stuff is going to be super expensive. So it's not the place that I'm starting about, oh, I need to go build an AI team or going down that road. That's probably not where I'm going to start. Instead, I think it's like, how can I go and take off the shelf, and I use that term very loosely, off the shelf AI technologies and apply them. And there's some obvious examples, stuff that's been around for a while, and things like the co-pilots and what have you that can provide productivity gains. So I'd be sort of looking across that landscape, and then I'd also be sort of stratifying this. So I'm right now somewhat skeptical on if buying a ChatGPT license or buying a Microsoft Copilot license for all of my users is going to drive enough productivity gains to generate whatever the number is, 20 or 35 bucks a month per employee to do it. So, I think you need to look at that. I think that there are tremendous advantages. Again, I use it every single day, but you need to be understanding where that's going to apply. So I think at the very lowest rung, it's a sort of broad-based application of these Gen AI-based tools. I think you should be cautious but progressive, right? I think you should be asking yourself, can you drive value with these? Does it justify the cost? I think in most cases, the answer on those are going to be about 50-50. as I already talked about, the top end of the spectrum, I think if you can find a use case, and they do exist, where you can apply a bespoke AI-based technology to creating competitive differentiated value in the marketplace for your customers, you should absolutely go there. You're probably going to want to do that with a partner, but I would be looking. I mean, I think you would be doing yourself a disservice by not at least asking that question of saying, is there an opportunity to do this? The hard part is it will not be out of the box. It will not be off the shelf. It will not be something cookie cutter. It's going to have to be something where you say to yourself, if I deliver this AI driven experience to my customers, that it's going to leapfrog me in the industry, in my competitive landscape. And if you find that, then that's a winner. I think the sweet spot for most organizations is going to be in the middle. This is product-based AI that's built into other products, that does align much more than just broad productivity, better. I mean, more than just using it for better search, but it's actually applying real value. So there are organizations that are doing this like yours, that it's a little bit more broad-based, some that are very, very specific to, say, optimizing supply chains. Everything in that spectrum, I think that is the sweet spot. That is the places where I'm going to actually get demonstrable value that is easy to justify from an ROI perspective. I can see that making this investment generates this return. I can draw a straight line between that, and potentially starts at least flirting with the edge of creating some competitive advantage by using that technology. And it may be in ways that I'm able to respond faster. So we talked about ITSM, right? In and of itself, if I'm reducing my response time on an incident, that's mostly an efficiency play. But if I do that enough and I do it at enough scale, I could actually be creating an environment where my organization as a whole is moving faster in the marketplace because they're spending less time dealing with solving problems with their technology, that actually creates competitive advantage, or at least supports a competitive advantage. And so looking at those types of applications where it's more than just raw productivity, but it's also not having to go and invest millions of dollars building an AI team, that's where I think the sweet spot is for particularly a mid-market organization.
Got it. And you've written and spoken about product-based AI versus AI products. Could you unpack the difference between the two, and what would be more applicable to what kind of companies?
Yeah, so I just sort of alluded to this. The bespoke thing that I'm talking about is an AI product, right? Where I'm actually going out and doing something, and I'm applying very big, very expensive. It can be super valuable, but that's a whole nother ball game, right? So sort of leaving that aside for a second. The other two examples are both product-based AI. And what that means is it's AI that somebody else has built and embedded into their product that you now have the opportunity to use. So the first thing is they're doing all the heavy lifting. They're doing all the building of the technology. They're doing all the model training. They're doing all of that. And then, but that doesn't, and this is why the difference between the two, right? The difference becomes, am I then applying it generically, or am I applying it specifically in the context of my organization? So the productivity type of stuff I ask, it's generic. There's nothing really specific to my organization. It's just a tool, and that's great. It has its use, but that's why I need to really look at the value versus cost on that. The reason the sweet spot is in the middle is this is product-based AI. So somebody else is doing all the heavy lifting of building out the AI, right? But the question, how I can create differentiation, is how I apply it. So there are plenty of organizations that already have forms of this, because AI is not brand new, in their organizations, and frankly, they're not using it. They don't know how to use it. They're afraid to use it, or they have not reworked their business processes or their workflows to allow for it into it. And I'm as guilty. I'll go back and use the ChatGPT as an example. I won't spill all my secrets right now, but I have found myself going through. Right? Part of my job is to produce content and to write, and I will never use AI to write an article for me. But I also found myself using it for these very mundane things, and then not too long ago, I woke up and said, "Wait, if I go through my whole workflow that I go through to produce a piece of content, there are places where I can use AI as part of that to make me more effective, to give me better ideas, to make me faster, whatever." And I had to go and rework my thought process and my workflow and how I could integrate it. That's the same idea. So the combination of that process of retooling the way you work to allow AI to make those processes better, and then applying, depending on the use case, your own data to train these models or to augment these models with your data so that then the results of this becomes much more specific. That's where this becomes super powerful. So it's important to understand building AI versus using AI and applying it. And then when you're applying it, distinguishing between something that's generic and something that you're building into your workflows using specific operational data or business processes to fuel it, which is going to not only make it more effective, but it's also going to make it this sort of hybrid bespoke, where it's starting to feel much like custom AI, but it's without having to have that overhead.
Got it. And you mentioned your own ChatGPT use case. We conducted a study lately where we surveyed IT folks to understand their concerns and apprehensions around AI. We also surveyed IT end users, and one of the questions we asked was how frequently did they use free tools, free AI tools like ChatGPT for their work. And what we wanted to understand is like whether or not they use it, right? Like if you add up the various frequencies, you find that 75% of employees or IT end users use free AI tools for their work, right? So SaaS made shadow IT pretty easy, right? Like if let's say you have enough budget, you have a credit card, you could just like buy a tool that would cost under $100 a month, right? And the cheaper the tool, the more questionable its security, right? So like shadow IT became a problem with SaaS, right? uh, but AI is perhaps a technology where the adoption on the end user side is much more rapid than IT bringing, let's say, a similar tool that's more secure, more walled, sandboxed uh, into the organization, right? So that and rightfully though, right? IT needs to be cautious about uh, this technology, but uh, I need to understand, like when you talk about the strategy of bringing in AI and using it and implementing it, how would you go about launching it to end users in a way that their comfort zone with AI is respected, but also in a way that is secure on the business standpoint, and it doesn't impact the trust. So, like AI also comes with its own share of problems, right? Like specifically Gen AI, there are inaccuracies, there are like issues pertaining to data security as well. How do you go about deploying it to a wider organization?
So yeah, I mean, I think that there are lots of nuances here and lots of risks and challenges. My general standpoint, however, is that IT leaders need to treat their consumers, the people that work in an organization, as adults. They need to educate them. They need to teach them that not all AI is the same, and we do need to treat it differently. And we do need to put some barriers around it. So the biggest risks with like a public open Gen AI type tool is that I can inadvertently, in an effort to try to solve a problem, upload a spreadsheet with sensitive data that now, while they're promising that they aren't ingesting that into the model, the reality is you're still sending it outside of your organization, and you need to be aware of that. So there's an educational process. You can solve some of that by implementing private versions. This is where where OpenAI is clearly going, trying to sell that, or Microsoft is clearly going, saying, "Hey, use a private version that will give you a firewall to protect your data." I think that there's some validity to that, and I would certainly be looking at that. There's a use case or a need for AI um, security and policies around it that make it clear. But in the end, as we've seen, whether it's shadow IT or all of this, I think there's two things that we can firmly identify. One, you're never going to stop it. And so you can, if you decide you're going to spend your time building moats and walls, you're going to lose that battle. So instead, you need to focus on the cultural and social engineering side of this and get people on board where they understand what's going on and you treat them like adults who have responsibility and a stake in the process. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we need to not treat it all as the same. And I've heard these stories of companies putting these mandates about no AI, like at all, anywhere, that just makes zero sense. So we need to recognize that we need a nuanced approach to how we do this. We need a nuanced strategy and a nuanced approach to how we deal with the security and the risk factors around this. But we have to just start by recognizing that not only is it going to happen, we need it to happen. And the last part of this, you talk about shadow IT, and I lived through what I call the shadow IT wars, and the ones that won, the CIOs, the executives that came out on the winning side, were the ones that recognized that shadow IT was a symptom, that it was reflective of the fact that IT was not being responsive enough to the needs of the organization. And the answer wasn't to put up another wall. The answer was to tear them down. The answer was to welcome them in and make them part of the process. And in doing so, and this is why I'm saying sharing the responsibility, sharing the accountability, in doing so, one, they became more responsible actors. They were not just running off and buying something because they could. They now were part of this process. But secondly, they quickly realized they didn't want to be in that business, right? Going out and buying Salesforce because you thought you could do it better and it was fast and helped you sell, that was great. But you suddenly realized every minute you spent doing administration of Salesforce was a minute you weren't selling. So very quickly, most of these shadow IT efforts gave the responsibility back to IT because they didn't want to be running the technology. They just wanted the results. And it was just a message that IT was in the way. And so I think what we're going to see with Gen AI, it's going to be the same thing. So my recommendation is don't put up the walls, invite them into the process, accept that if they are reaching for this tool, it means it's giving them some value. Understand that value, and then understand how to protect them and the organization and make them a part of that process where they share in that responsibility and share that accountability. With the big safeguards, we need to still have the security stuff running. But I'm just saying that's going to be your answer. If you try to lock it down, you're just going to lose.
I appreciate you bringing your experience to the fore, and it'll help folks who are trying to fight that battle, perhaps the wrong way or the hard way. As you rightly said, that if let's say, if the IT team becomes a no team, and you block all domains with .ai extension, then you'd be perceived a certain way, and then employees and end users would just circumvent IT guardrails, so to speak, right? So, like, based on what you've seen happen over the years in ITSM and IT organizations in general, and based on everything that you've seen in the world of AI, the evolution of Gen AI with OpenAI, let's say you were to project 6 to 12 months into the future, how do you see all of this unfolding?
It's actually it's a very difficult question to answer because we are looking at two almost completely opposite trend lines. On the one hand, the hype and the development, in fairness, it's not a genuine development of specifically Gen AI, and not only how it's developing, but how it's pulling all of these other forms of AI with it. We've seen more exponential development and improvement across every aspect of AI because of this, because it has sort of reawakened the imagination of how you can apply this. So you have this explosive trajectory. And then on the other hand, you have the enterprise IT organization, which is glacial in its rate of change in most cases, in most ways. I was just talking to somebody about how I ran an executive event about a year ago, and it was like 40 CIOs and senior execs, and I went around the room and it's like, what are your biggest challenges? And we got done going through it, and I started like chuckling because it's like, those are the exact same challenges I had when I was running IT 20 some odd years ago. It's like things hadn't really changed. The technology had changed. And likewise, I think when we look at some of the technology, I've been talking to a lot of executives recently about this, and everyone's very interested in Gen AI. And yet you ask them about their tech stack today. Most of them are still running on legacy architecture. Most of them are just really now starting to migrate into the cloud and all. So I look at these two things and go, how do they balance? I think on the one hand, we're going to clearly see the continued exponential evolution of the technology, and its capabilities are going to continue to expand. On the other hand, I think we're going to continue to see that IT organizations rightfully are always going to be focused on the business value that they can drive from a given technology. And right now, most of particularly the Gen AI use cases are still solutions looking for problems. And there's value in that, because part of this process is taking the blinders off and saying, hey, there's a new way I can do this. I can re-envision the way I work, or I can re-envision the business model, or re-envision how I engage with the customer, because this technology is making something possible that wasn't possible a year ago. But it's also this process of, it has to be justifiable. It has to make sense in a business context. So all that to say, I sort of don't know. I mean, I think we're going to see this continued explosion in technology. I do not expect that we're going to wake up, that we were to get back on the podcast a year from now going, wow, can you believe every enterprise just looked totally different? I don't think that for a minute. But I think there are going to be some breakout changes. And I do think that there's going to be some amazing stories of a handful of organizations that found that sweet spot. Whether that's product-based IT or they went and built their own, that they found a way to apply AI in a way that generated meaningful competitive value, and it propelled their organization into some new future, whether that's a new business model, new place in the market, something. We're going to hear those stories. But I do think they're probably going to be, that we're going to hear about them because they're going to be the exception, not the norm. So I think for most organizations, it's going to be a process. I think it's going to, if we were to regroup a year from now, I think that we would find that there's going to be a much deeper penetration of particularly Gen AI, but AI overall into organizations. And it will be in the beginning of a cultural transition where it becomes part of operating models. Because right now it's not. Right now, in almost every organization I've talked to, it is something still playing on the fringes, something used here and there, but it's not a core of the operating model. I think we're going to see the beginning movement of it becoming part of the core operating model in the next 24 months.
Got it. And from all the IT leaders you speak with, and all the companies that you follow, except for the giants that like for instance, Microsoft is obviously doing some things right with OpenAI, but what examples have you seen, or what have you what IT organizations have you seen doing it right? And your definition of right could be different from my definition of right, but essentially on the right path according to you.
You're talking about enterprise organizations?
Right. And you don't have to name the organization, but you can tell me what they're doing exactly that a lot of people are missing.
So I'll give you some examples. Yeah, I'm not going to name anybody. I think the ones that I think are, I'm not saying not getting it right, but I think that are just, they're just dancing on the edge is, the folks that are just going down and doing the productivity stuff. The ones that are, I think, doing it right are the ones that are openly experimenting, but experimenting with real stuff. So an example is one healthcare CTO I know is they're playing with taking patient encounter data, and I don't remember exactly what area of the healthcare spectrum they were looking at, but they had a specific area, and they're taking this data and they were testing it with some private LLMs as a way to see if they could identify patterns in this patient encounter data that they had missed, that they couldn't see. And the results were promising. And so this is an example of what I think today means getting it right, meaning that they weren't diving in and investing tens of millions of dollars saying this is it has to be it. But they also weren't just taking this super pedestrian approach to it. They were testing it with something that was meaningful, that if it works, that it could truly transform how they operate, how they engage with patients, how they can lead to better health outcomes, right? It was really, really meaningful. So I think, if I had to boil that down, it's play where the stakes are big, but make small incremental bets that allow you to test and figure this out as you go. And I think if you do that, then that sets you up to get it right. And my own experience is that when you go down that road, it's not even about being right. It's about the process that you go through that. It will open up doors, light bulbs will go off, and that's what changes it. I used to I gave a lot of keynotes pre-pandemic, and when I did, people would often call me a futurist, and I used to bristle at that. And then I realized that it's because I and many people look at it wrong. That they think that a futurist is someone who knows what the future is going to be or who can predict the future. And to me, a future is just someone who is in a constant state of exploration about the future, constantly probing to see where it goes. And the CTO I'm talking about, I think, is acting like a futurist. It's probing, trying to see where this goes. And I think that's who's going to win particularly through this next 12 to 24 months, as we're in these very early stages. You can't sit back on your laurels. You can't sit back and wait for it to happen. You also, I think, unless you're really sure, you shouldn't be making these big swings, but you need to be probing and exploring and doing it in ways where the stakes are big.
Great. And the healthcare sector is one such industry where, like for instance, if someone were to ask you if you would go to an experienced doctor for a surgery, basically who's had a lot of experience, but might not have nimble hands, or might not have the most recent, might not have gone through the most recent literature or study. Or would you go to a younger doctor who might have just come out of college very recently, have all the recent studies and up to date information, but might not have that experience or judgment based on all the cases that they might have seen? And AI can bring both together, right? It can just study all of the medical records that have been saved on a computer somewhere, and it can also append that with the latest nuances, right? Any other industry you can think of where AI can make a massive difference uh, versus what humans can do?
Oh, I would flip it around on you and dare you to come up with one where it can't. There is probably the industries that are going to be most not negatively impacted, the most restricted on their ability to play AI are those that are physically driven, right? If my primary business is to build brick walls, that's AI in its current state. But interesting again, as I talked about, the last year of hype and excitement has driven advancements. We are seeing massive advancements in the robotics side right now because of it. And what's interesting is mostly because they are now able to apply LLM approaches to teaching robotic actions, whereas before they were taking this very systematic, programmatic, very slow approach to teaching them. Now they're using combinations of vision learning and LLM-based approaches to basically have a human do an action, recording that and distilling that down and using that to train the robots to take these actions. Still early stages, but I think we're seeing it. So I think we're seeing this sort of explosion in innovation because of what's happened. But clearly, if you're in an industry where it's still physically driven predominantly, that you're going to have less potential impact. If you're in a knowledge business, if you're in an information business in any way, which is a massive part of our sector,
Right.
huge impacts. But even if you are physically, if look at Uber as an example, or any of the food delivery companies, right? There's still a huge physical element to it, and yet they were able to use technology to truly transform major components of the business process. While all of those elements are still going to be open to AI-driven efficiency gains and productivity gains and experiential gains. Let's not forget that experiential is a huge piece of it. So I think there's almost any industry. There is no industry where I'd be sitting back, resting my laurels, going, "Oh, well, this isn't going to affect me."
Right, right. That's actually true. Some industries, thanks to ChatGPT and LLMs, have been transformed sooner. And like you mentioned, actual robots and robotics are using that same approach, maybe reinforced learning with human feedback or learning through human interaction directly. At the recent CES event, there was this product called Rabbit, right? Like pretty much everyone saw the demo, where you could actually teach the LAM, quote unquote, large action model, what to do, essentially what, how you would use a Dolly or Midjourney or, like any other tool. So, yeah, this has been great. And, there have been a lot of insights that our community will take away. we wanted to keep it pragmatic since it's you and have a lot of examples. And we're not disappointed. Like this was amazing. Charlie, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights and sharing your pragmatic ideas. It was great to talk to you, and we are looking forward to the next conversation with you, where we pick up another topic, go into another rabbit hole, and explore it together.
Absolutely. We'll definitely regroup in a year and see how this all played out.
Right. We could do projections versus how it panned out episode.
Exactly.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much for your time, Charlie. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. To stay updated with future videos, subscribe and click on the button again to enable all notifications. Bye for now.